It's another day. Uh, Welcome. One of the things that became abundantly clear, among other things, but something that really hit home here, teaching at university for many years here in Taiwan. And the different, a little bit shocked, but I was sort of aware of this situation, but it was always so apparent that the whole education system here is set up based on memory. My students had the most amazing memories you can imagine. So, if the goal of education was to develop an ability to memorize, they certainly succeeded here. I could give one page, maybe 4 paragraphs to my students and give them 20 minutes, and most of them could memorize 80% or more. Whereas I wouldn't even attempt. Certain things, periodical table, multiplication, division, numbers, I was forced to memorize a lot. Math, which later, I had an early interest in math, but it was pretty much stifled by the requirement to remember what you learned before. That you couldn't perform this. You can't do calculus without geometry. You can't do geometry without algebra. You can only do arithmetic. And actually, when it was just arithmetic, I did pretty well. And I enjoyed it. That's the key to doing well at anything, isn't it? If you enjoy it, it will encourage you. I tried to carry this idea of enjoyment. I tried to make English language acquisition as a second language, more palatable, more friendly, more fun for my students here, because their system pretty much drains the fun out of anything. The only time you really get to be a child is a toddler. And then it seems to me that they're pampered. The toddlers can do pretty much anything, even in a public environment. In a restaurant, they can scream and yell. In the department store, they can throw a fit. And parents just are very understanding and very much just let them do what they will do. And of course, it only encourages more of the same behavior, doesn't it? But then, as soon as they start school, somehow this magic time of being a toddler is gone, and they're forced to grow up so quickly. At least grow to an extent. And then, interestingly, by the time they hit university, they start to be coddled again. And whereas they were forced to grow up quickly in the kindergarten, elementary school, and high school, in university, they're kind of the opposite. They're kind of coddled. They're allowed to stay at home after university until such time that they're married. And then a lot of times the son will bring the wife into his home, and the daughter will go into the home of her betrothed. So there's a coddling again. So coddle in the beginning, coddle at the end of childhood. Anything to postpone maturity. And I think it has a lot to do with the parents feeling their own aging process and attempt to keep a child a child. But anyway, this stress on memorizing facts, figures, dates, names, regurgitating, vomiting it on the test. And if you did this well, you're a top student. If you didn't do this so well, you were lower in the ranks. But intelligence, you were found to be intelligent if you could remember, if you're good at memorization, if you're good at repeating what you've heard from teachers, repeating what you've read from your textbooks. And this is solely how you're judged. Your entrance into the university depends on test scores, and test scores come completely from rote memory regurgitation. You're evaluated at how well you can regurgitate. Imagine being judged on your ability to vomit up. Most times, information, facts that will have no direct bearing on your life, post-university life. So, in this system, memory is seen as intelligence. And it's interesting because intelligence, as I saw it, is always a separate entity. Intelligence and memory, memorization, or even memories, holding on to our memories. And the big fear in our society is in it, as you age, you start to forget. And people are really worried about Alzheimer's. I've forgotten. It gets extreme. I forgot my children. But it's what's interesting with this fading, it's only recent memories, fairly recent memories, that seem to go. A lot of these people that I've had occasion to talk to that are in the throes of dementia at different stages, they can remember clearly. I can't ever forget about my mom talking about a childhood experience when she was a little girl with her dress and she was hanging on the jungle gym or swinging, and her mother scolded her. She said, "The boys can look up your dress." And here she is, an 85-year-old woman, telling me this story as if she was the wounded little innocent 4 or 5-year-old girl that was not aware of any prurient interest that the boys might have on her that would inhibit her. Give her pants, Mom. If you're so worried about her dress and her underwear, give her pants. Let her wear pants. Anyway, this idea that this big fear that we have of forgetting everything. And it's ironic because we come into this life with a clean slate. We forgot everything that we had learned about who and what we are. Everything was gone. And it seems, I like continuity, I like balance. It seems that what's so bad about forgetting everything as you age? Especially when it's all illusion. It's illusory, it has no value into knowing, separating the reality from the non-reality. Has no value. But here, it's confused with intelligence. And I always saw, as I started to say, memory, memorization, and intelligence as two separate entities. Two separate. And I'm laughing at this point because what comes immediately to mind is what I've been talking about. all along. Let's say that memory and intelligence are different, which they certainly are. But what about if you had a duality, memory versus intelligence? You would start to see that there's intelligent memories and there's memories in intelligence. So again, this trap of duality, and which is overcome by it's only the veil of ignorance is only lifted when you see the unity, the non-duality, the oneness. But anyway, for the purposes of, I'm talking about this first of all just to share that I encourage critical thinking in my students, and they've never been, for most of them, have never been challenged to think, and much less question, and even more so to be able to have a thought, support that thought with logic and rationality by sorting out what works for them. So I would stress this critical thinking, made so obvious by the lack of any questions. So I always thought my goal as a teacher is to encourage the questioning process, have much fewer answers. I remember asking a student, what does she think? And she said to me, well, tell me what you think and then I can tell you what I think. So she was just going to parrot, to repeat my words to me, and I would be so simple-minded that I would applaud her and say, yay, you're a smart girl. And I said, no, what I think or feel about anything is irrelevant. I'm here to encourage you to think. I'm here to encourage you to question authority. Question your culture. Question your society. Question your government. Question your parents. And most importantly, question your teachers. Don't offer blind allegiance. Of such blind allegiance only fosters and supports totalitarianism. As a friend once told me here in Taiwan, shut up and just do as you're told. No questioning, just accept. And he was a product of an authoritarian education, so one would not expect anything else for him. But at one point I had to agree, I was in far less trouble if I shut up and just followed what I was told. Being a rebel, always being a rebel, it led to a lot of confrontation, a lot of discomfort. I was punished a lot, but somehow it didn't deter me from the rebellion, the rebellious being that I had been and continue to be. So why is it important? Why is it important to start separating, to distance memorization from intelligence? Well, I would guess that 90% of the college graduates here in Taiwan, the first thing that dawns on once in the workplace and once they learn the skills that they needed for this job, they see how unprepared how their education failed to prepare them for the life they would lead. But they're smart. They were quick to adapt. And they started learning. primarily by forgetting most of what they had learned in their education. So memorization ultimately leads to forgetfulness. But for my interests, other than sharing something that I was up against here, sharing the society's misunderstanding, and I was fortunate to have a few teachers that didn't follow this paradigm of rote memory, even in my education, and these are the ones that I learned the most from. And these are the ones that became my mentors as I came to a point where it's my turn to teach, and I would try to model myself after these very few individuals that encouraged me to think, discouraged me to memorize, encouraged me to evaluate, to consider, to adopt my own points of view, and to learn how to defend these points of view. Because academic life in university is basically an attack. If you write anything, you're going to be attacked. That goes without saying. Any kind of academic writing, if somebody, as soon as you publish something, as soon as it's out there, people will attack you. And this goes for the whole arena in life, politics. As soon as you are bold enough to express, to represent what you really believe and think, you're going to be attacked. And that's why we have this kind of vanilla, mushy kind of political rhetoric. Don't ever say anything that's going to alienate people, that you think will alienate people. But guess what? Simply by speaking, as I'm speaking here, by design, by definition, I've already alienated many, many people. People with vested interests in the system as it is now. People with a lack of imagination or ability to adjust, to reprogram, to rediscover how to be a teacher or a role model. How to encourage instead of criticize. How to praise. So teaching at university gave me lots of opportunity to practice these things without getting on a soapbox and preaching. Because the idea of preaching is abhorrent. Preaching assumes that you have some kind of inside track. I heard today that simply by reading one book, you can become God's representative here on earth. And they're talking about the Bible. This one book will enable you to be God's representative on the earthly plane. Imagine. Yeah. It's ironic, isn't it? How little it takes to become an expert. 10 books, you're knowledgeable. 100 books, you're an expert. 1,000 books, and you become the sole source of that discipline or that information. And how well you can remember those books. I can remember the facts and the dates and the names compared to the gist, the kernel, the point of it all. What information will add to your intelligence? What information was provided by this book, if any? So, another thing that I thought that came to pass in my experience was there's two things I wasn't afraid to do. If I had a book or my approach was not working for this particular class, because each class is unique. You can't use one syllabus. One size does not fit all. You have to, with 2 or 3 weeks in, by the time you learn the personality of the class, and indeed, a class does have a personality. You learn the personality, you evaluate by looking at their faces. Do they have puzzles? Are they sleeping? Are they bored? These are clues to you that your message is not resonating with them. So it's time to switch up. So I was never shy, never hesitated to change something that was not working. I didn't stick to it to the bitter end. I switched up, and with the hopes that my switch up would be more effective, that the students would leave with more than they came to the class with. It was always my goal. So this idea to change up if something wasn't working. But the other thing that was really important that I saw too little of, if I was asked, in the rare occasion, if I was asked a question that, was rare, if I was asked a question that I didn't know the answer to, I'm not saying it's not rare that I didn't know the answer. What was rare is that a student would ask such a question. And one sticking in my mind foremost is, if you're an English teacher, if you're teaching us how to learn English, why are you struggling so hard to learn Chinese? And to this day, I don't have an answer to that question. That's the hardest question I ever faced as a professor, as a lecturer. Yeah, good question. That's A material. That's an intelligent question. But I was never afraid to say, I don't know. But I will find out. And this was the most important. But the students knew that by the next week I would have done research or had time to sort it out and answer as well as I can. But the important thing is to follow up, is to do it, is to be consistent, so that the students just go, oh, well, I'll never hear the end of that. And usually, if you come up again and say, well, I found that this is what my research told me, and or this is what I've come to realize when I had a chance to really reflect on this question, to work on this question. So these two things. No, the fear not to change if something wasn't working, and the ability to say, I don't know. Because I always knew that I had read a direct quote. I'll quote Sadhguru. Don't talk about anything that is not a reality for you. Some people, I've seen them make up answers for different reasons. I've seen professors make up answers. You ask them a question and they make up an answer, which is complete BS. But they don't want to appear ignorant. And another different reaction is, when I lived in Samoa, I would ask them a question, and they didn't want to say I don't know, because they wanted to please me, so they gave me an answer. And this is nicer, maybe, for someone to give you an answer to please you than rather to support their fragile ego. They don't want to surrender their high platform of teaching down. They don't want to come down and gaze at students eye to eye, soul to soul, individual to individual. So thanks, Sadhguru. And I have made every effort to, with these opportunities that I have, is sharing these 200 plus videos that I've shared with people in this last 2.5 years, is that I do my best not to talk about anything that's not a reality for me. If it's not true for you, don't talk about it. And the beauty of this, if it's not true for you, don't talk about it. The beauty is, if you don't talk about these things, a certain yearning will appear in which you will lead you there. It will lead you to these things that were not in your purview, that weren't in your arena. Only by not talking about it. You don't talk about this yearning to learn more. So, in other words, if you talk about these things, if you talk about things you don't know to be true, the real thing will never happen to you. So not only will you have the curiosity, the impetus, not only will you have what it takes to pursue that which you don't know by simply not talking about it, you'll get it. And on the other hand, if you talk about things that you don't know, you're never going to get it. There's not room for getting it. There's no pause, there's no empty, there's no silence. So if you want to avoid reality, talk about what you don't know. Talking about what you don't know to be true is simply gossiping. And you want to, if your goal is to avoid reality, gossiping is the best way. Gossiping is the best way, bagua we say here. Gossiping is the best way to avoid reality. So it would seem, if you turn that on the head, by not gossiping, which is not talking, if gossiping is simply talking about something that you don't know, then by not gossiping, you'll give room for the planting of the seed, the flowering of the experience, that which you previously didn't know, that which was previously unknown, can become known simply by not talking about it. Pretty simple, huh? And so that's one reason that you shouldn't talk about things that you don't know to be true. And it's not this, now let's be clear here, things that to be true for yourself. This humility to understand that what might be my truth might be different than your truth. And certainly, most likely is. But then we know there's such things as universal truth. So that's a deeper kind of truth, isn't it? And these deeper kinds of truths, again, are not discovered by talking about them. They're discovered by patiently waiting for them to flower and fruit. And we know that of the last few times I've been talking about clarity, that elusive, and I was saying that some clarity, I'm experiencing clarity these few days. And again, I want to quote from Sadhguru today. I heard him say, clarity will come to you only when you're not contaminated by memory. So clarity was a goal. And I guess I had remembered what didn't work, hadn't I? And that's a memory, isn't it? A memory is not a reflection of a past occurrence. It's a reflection only of your take on a past occurrence. Ask 5 people, get 5 different reports. I love that story of the blind man holding the elephant. One has a trunk. Oh, the elephant's like a snake. One has an ear. Oh, the elephant is like a big bird. It's got these big flapping wings. One holding his foot. This is an elephant is like a tree. So it depends on what's available to you that becomes your truth. What you can see, what you can perceive becomes your truth. And interestingly, the elephant was a combination of all the blind man's truths. And I think that if you added up truth for all humanity, then would you get pretty close to reality, wouldn't you? The oneness. So what I want to say is memory is not intelligence. I'm sorry, higher educational. I'm sorry, the educators and the educational system in Taiwan. Memory is not intelligence. Maybe I should have a shirt. Memory is not intelligence. Memory and intelligence are just different dimensions. And if you can separate these two, if you're able to separate these two, you can live with that separation. You can understand that separation. You took time to experience this separation because all your training, more or less, is based on that memory is intelligence. So to learn to separate the two. And what's your reward? What's in it for you to learn to separate intelligence and memory? Well, it's if you're like me, where I saw clarity because my state of existence was the polar opposite. My mind was chaos. The world I saw around me was essentially chaotic. And I yearned for clarity because I knew inherent in clarity was simplicity, was unity. So the world is chaotic? Certainly. The world is perfectly ordered? Certainly. Which is easier to live with? Well, it's one and the same, isn't it? Again, dualism merging into non-dualistic experience. So basically I want to say, if you hold this separate, intelligence and memory, crystal clear clarity will be your reward. So it's something to practice. It takes work because we spent a lifetime learning the opposite, didn't we? It takes time to separate these, but it's worth the effort.